Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to take a few seconds here just to let everyone join on.
And Malavika, I just realized maybe what we should also do is ask folks to keep their cameras off unless they're speaking.
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
But yeah, as Ryan mentioned, if you're joining us, please keep your camera off just so we can focus on who our speakers are for today. But please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can kind of, add your name, your organization, if you're comfortable doing so. I also encourage the speakers to do that, and so we can kind of get an introduction going in the chat. And awesome. I think I'm going to start and we'll kind of like let people stream in. This is a recorded session. And so that way, if you've missed anything at the start, you can kind of always check back in. Thank you for being here today. My name is Malvika Rendive. I am the program coordinator at SID-United States. You may have known us as SID Washington, but we've recently rebranded to SID-United States. So thank you for being here. This is a virtual event, which is preparing the next gen of inclusive development professionals in a changing world. And it is co-hosted by the Young Professionals in Development Network and the Inclusive Development Workgroup. And I'm going to turn it over to the co-chairs in a little bit. We just have a few house rules to go over for the session today. A little bit about SID-United States, or as you knew us before, SID Washington. We're the largest and the most active chapter of the Society for International Development and International Network that was founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We serve as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges facing our community, as we're doing today. There are different ways that you can get involved with us. You can check out some of our upcoming events for this month and sign up for a weekly newsletter that has a lot of our activity and programming on it. And you can go to SID-US.org to do that. We also have multiple co-chair positions opening up, as well as internships. And you can also stay tuned for other volunteer opportunities in different capacities with us. And you can find all of that information on our website as well. Or you can follow us on social media to stay updated with our activity and programming. A few things to note for today. As I mentioned, this is a recorded session and it will be shared publicly through our networks and social media channels. Live translation closed captioning is available and it can be activated through your own personal settings. For any questions that you may have, please post them in the chat box and you can also address them to a specific speaker if you wish to do so. Please make sure that because of limited time for this event, we will try to get to as many questions as we can, but we cannot guarantee that will happen. So just precaution from the start. I will turn it over to Chizi Igwe, who is one of the co-chairs of the Young Professionals in Development Network Development Networks.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for taking some time to join us. As Malvika mentioned, my name is Chizi Igwe. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Young Professional Network. And in a minute, my co-chair will introduce himself. We primarily hold events throughout the year to support young professionals either entering the international development sector or looking to develop or transition. And we try to touch on topics ranging from things like resume prep and interview to topics of the changing dynamics in the sector, which is why we were more than happy to partner on this event and talk about how a young professional can approach the dynamic and changing elements of our sector. So please feel free to follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn for any updates about upcoming events. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joseph. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't tell you who I am. I work at the Greater Washington Partnership and I manage our inclusive growth portfolio. And prior to that, spent a bit of time with Gates Foundation and some time abroad in China. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting to know each and every one of you. Joseph, over to you.
Thanks, Chizi. My name is Joseph Zorgong. And as Chizi mentioned, I am the other co-chair of the Young Professionals Network. And we're excited to have you at this event. As Chizi also said, we're actually going to be having another event later this year, so stay tuned. I work at FHI 360, an international health development organization, and I'm responsible for essentially getting us incorporated in countries where we implement mostly USAID projects. in Eastern and Southern Africa. And with that, I'm going to pass that over to Kaylin.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I'm Caitlin Sullivan-Fleury. I'm the co-chair of the Inclusive Development Workgroup at SID, and I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm the operations director for our US government support division at Chemonics International. So we provide a number of project lifecycle support work areas. So compliance, procurement, grants, a lot of the things a project will need to implement for USAID. But prior to that, I was a gender equality and social inclusion specialist at Chemonics. So that is where my interest in inclusive development began. And I have been co-chair of this group with Ryan for the last year and a half. And as the Inclusive Development Work Group, we gather professionals from throughout the international development industry and beyond that are interested in making our work more inclusive. So that could be from a variety of dimensions of identity, from persons with disabilities to Indigenous people, gender equality, religious and ethnic minorities. We really try to take an intersectional approach to the future of international development. And our event topics may range from this kind of event where we're partnering with the YPN to an event on a specific type of social inclusion, like I mentioned, and Ryan and I are also looking forward to organizing future events, and we will share our LinkedIn group with you later in the event in case you'd like to stay in touch. So with that, I'll hand it to Ryan, who's not only my co-chair, but our moderator. So take it away, Ryan.
Well, thank you so much, Kaylin. And thank you to everyone who helped to organize this amazing event. It's been wonderful. Even just, you know, when you're developing an event and just the thought process that goes into it and the questions that are asked that kind of come to this moment and will further themselves through our conversation today. So thank you to everyone. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think it's poignant and important. We just came off of the wonderful and amazing SID annual conference with over 15,000 participants from the field of international development, where we're kind of at the stage of turning over, who are we? We're coming back together and trying to figure out where we want to go and what we want to be. And, you know, as Cheesy and Joseph mentioned, it's really important that we examine not just where we are today, but what does the future look like? And for those of you on the call that find yourself to be a young professionals or just young at heart, like some of us, you know, it's important that we set ourselves up for preparing a longitudinal vision for where we want to go in this field, and also be prepared to be adaptive as we evolve. So real quick, let me just set the stage for today's event. Today, we're actually going to explore the future of development and strive to identify areas in which professionals within the industry might prepare for and work towards in advancing inclusive development throughout the field of development. We will explore with our panelists what is inclusive development and what are our goals for 2030, let's say. And we want to know what the current barriers that we are facing in order that will prevent us from getting to those goals, and what skill sets, frameworks, approaches, and even philosophies are necessary to achieve our longitudinal goals. Today, we're actually building on previous events and that the Inclusive Development Working Group has co-organized and led alongside other work groups, where we have explored the application of diversity, equity, and inclusion across the field of development to advance our inclusive development practices. And also our other session in which we explored linguistic barriers in the field, which prevent us from having the impact we want in the world, particularly examining the concepts of intersectionality and the layered realities of our work, the complexities of the issues and environments in which we work, and the positionality we as professionals bring to the field as practitioners ourselves. Today, we look to the future and what the quote unquote next generation inclusive development professional ought to be thinking about as they approach this work. We actually built this session based on a 2018 article of a similar name, sponsored by DevEx, USAID, and DAI. Hopefully we can maybe share that in the chat. But the article drew from over 2,500 development professionals to gauge their understanding of where the industry is headed. The vast majority of survey respondents acknowledged the overall importance of learning new technologies, skills, and approaches in order to excel in the future, not just organizationally, but as professionals. Given the shifting development finance landscape, social, political, and geopolitical changes that are taking place in the world, technological advances and transformation of education and human capital around the world, these will all drive the way the industry moves. We're seeing major shifts. We're becoming more interconnected as a planet and as people. We will particularly grow in the sectors of energy, private sector engagement, health, and technology. And all while we're facing global pressing issues such as climate change, global health, conflict, peace, and security, along with agriculture and food security. And so as we look towards the most significant areas of growth, and we look at specifically technological areas for the next generation, we see that geographic information systems, or GIS, are becoming big and important to us. Big data, oh my God, Natalia, I can't wait to talk with you about big data. Digital connectivity, digital finance, and cloud computing all will play a vital role in the way we do business and connect around the world. These technologies will allow us to better assess the impact of our work around the world and improve our operational efficiencies, transform the way we offer technical assistance, and advance policies to reinforce some of the work that we're doing. As development professionals, to contribute to these advances, we all must carry and shift our approaches and paradigms to consider sustainability of our programs, to provide evidence-based programming, to enhance our capacity development capabilities, and to be more agile in the way that we implement our programs, and that our efforts are cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral alongside and centered alongside local communities. So that's kind of where is the field going? We see that it's evolving. And then now, as we have faced the pandemic, we have also seen the significance that organizations and networks will play in advancing this work as well. Workplace trends and versatility and cultural mind shifts have demonstrated the need to change the way we do our work. There's more people who are working remotely or in different capacities around the world. There's a greater number of contingent workers or people who are doing contractual work or part-time work in different parts of the world. And we see that organizations, the employers themselves, are no longer just that place you go to do work, but now they are actually serve as social safety nets where we come together in times of strife and struggle. And we also recognize that we've all had to adapt, every single one of us in one way or another. And so there's no longer this need for the direct expert to be this one expert to really understand the difference between the critical skill sets and your role. Having multiple skill sets is what's going to really transform us. And as the field of development is actually thinking about localization as well in local communities, and the pandemic itself, there's a greater, I don't want to say retreat, but coming back to the broader humanity that exists in all of us and really being able and having the need to see each other, really see who we are. And then just really understanding that we are in an interconnected world, and that means our work itself is going to be far more complex and nuanced. And rather than being afraid of that, we need to be able to really look into who we are. And finally, just this last week, we had the great privilege of just trying to get a sense of what's up. We did a SNAP survey of some leaders in our industry who are really the experts in inclusive development, gender equality, social inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even some who are actually leaders of organizations in the field of development. And looking at the thoroughfare of their responses, a lot of them are saying, you know, especially when it comes to inclusive development, how do we change our minds? How do we change our attitudes to be prepared as professionals so that we're breaking these old cycles and mentalities that actually perpetuate the colonization of our work? How about that? You know, that don't allow us to actually do the jobs that we need to do. And we need to recognize that inclusive development is not that one thing that's on the side or that thing we check a box to do, just like we don't do that with Jazzy work, right? But that this work, including DEIA, it is imperative to what everything we do. So y'all get on the train, get on the bus, because if you ain't doing this, you're doing something wrong. Anyway, long story short is, y'all, sorry to give you the diatribe, but I really wanted to set the stage for this important conversation because we are so grateful to now be able to kind of turn to a more specific and nuanced conversation about inclusive development itself. And we have three amazing panelists with us today who each bring with them their own unique purview and experience and lived realities that kind of help us think about what the future of inclusive development will look like. And so I'm proud to introduce our panelists today who I'm so thankful for your time. I first want to start with Aisha Alexander, who is the Senior Impact and Design Manager at the Clinton Global Initiative University, a program of the Clinton Foundation. As CGIU Senior Impact and Design Manager, Aisha has created the Social Impact and Leadership Curriculum for youth social entrepreneurs who participate in the year-round Clinton Global Initiative University program. She also researches, designs, and sources the curriculum content and produces community-wide events to help educate this wide range of students. Aisha, correct me if I'm wrong, there is over 10,000 alumni that have gone through your program, many of which have been named as Forbes 40 under 40. I think one person got knighted by the Queen, is that correct? Something like that. Two!
At least two that we know about. Yeah, yeah. We're actually at a little bit over 11,800 at this point.
Oh, wow, that's great. Well, and I also know in our audience is the one and only Vinnie Joel, who actually helped to interview at the latest Clinton Global Initiative University, Hillary Clinton herself. So yay, welcome Vinnie. And welcome Aisha. I'm looking forward to hearing your expertise on not only social entrepreneurship, but I also know you have a passion on accessibility, including your fun work on the side, because we all have side hustles, let's be real, as a science communicator. And you've created a science and anthropology blog called The Rockstar Anthropologist that kind of helps people better understand science. So excited to hear from you. All right. Bringing on Natalia Bushwald, who is a business partner, talent, and people operations at the Education Advisory Board. Natalia is an education technology professional, and they have expertise in software engineering, curriculum and course design, and people management. They currently oversee talent and people operations at the EAB. And Natalia, myself, and Kaylin actually go back a couple of years when Natalia used to work at Tech Change and was so passionate about just digital transformation in education and helped to lead and design alongside their team at Tech Change, Gender Data 101 course that was developed alongside Meta, formerly known as Facebook. And Natalia was the leader who, oh my gosh, did so much amazing work to just help us all think a lot more about what is gender and how does it fit with data freaking stuff. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. So I'm so looking forward to your comments, Natalia, today, because I feel like your unique purview is kind of where everything's going, the way digital transformation and all that stuff. Anyway, we'll get to that later. And then finally, oh my gosh, I'm really excited to introduce Professor Jenny C. Aker, who is a professor of development economics at the Fletcher School and with the Department of Economics at Tufts University. She also serves as the director of the Fletcher Leadership Program in Financial Inclusion. She's the deputy director of the Hitachi Center for Technology and International Affairs and the co-director of the Center for International Environment and Resource Policy. Outside of Tufts, she is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development and the co-chair of Digify Africa at JPAL. And her current work seeks to understand the impact of information technology on development outcomes in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the areas of agriculture, agricultural markets, adult education, and financial inclusion. Jenny completed her PhD in agricultural economics at the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, Jenny. We're so excited. Thank you for being here, especially knowing you literally just got back from Niger, where you were doing some important work. And I understand that in your role from one of your previous students, one of our co-chairs, Joseph, you are very passionate about young people as well. And through your program at the Fletcher Leadership Program on Financial Inclusion, you've helped to equip potential change makers in developing and emerging markets with the skills to design financial inclusion policies in their countries. That's amazing. So I'm really excited to just talk with all of you and learn kind of like where are we going? What are the barriers we're facing? And what are the skills to get there? And so I guess I'll go ahead and turn it over, start with Jenny, to really think more of the big picture, given your theoretical work and how you're applying it around the world. You know, when we think of inclusive development, what is it to you, and where will we go? Where do we need to go by, say, the year 2030? What will it look like then?
That is a huge question, but thank you so much for the really kind introduction. I'm very honored to be here on this panel with my distinguished kind of colleagues. So, I mean, I was thinking about this a lot last week, as I've been working in Niger for about 20 years and seeing kind of a lot of things change, and then some things maybe not change quite as much. And I thought, you know, speaking with a village chief in Heart of Our, you know, about his future and what he envisioned for the future of his community and of Niger, it was really interesting. I think I came up with like kind of three things is where I hope we would be as a development community. The first is that we would kind of have a development process that really brings into perspective the voices of different institutions and structures and groups. You know, we've talked about this for a while, but really making sure that there's a process that allows us to bring in the voices of these different stakeholders. And then as we bring in their voices, kind of design a process to kind of identify strengths and weaknesses. So kind of build upon individuals and kind of institutions' strengths, and at the same time kind of reinforce kind of some weaknesses that might be there. And all of that, the goal is to kind of create sustainable opportunities and benefits for different groups, so that, you know, every household, you know, can have a dignified level of well-being, however that household wants to define that dignified level of well-being. So the way that I define my well-being might not be the same as yours, Ryan, or as Maisha's. And then I was thinking about that this isn't necessarily inclusive, doesn't necessarily mean equity, you know, that everyone's kind of has the same income. There might be some, unfortunately, there might be some redistribution of wealth in order to get there. But I really view this as a process that allows us to hear from these different voices to kind of create these sustainable opportunities and benefits, so that people can kind of have a way of life that they hope for and they're proud of for themselves and for their families. So that's kind of my big picture thing. I don't know if you want me to stop there and then you kind of ask some sub questions as well to make it a
well. If you could summarize, if you could finish the sentence, by the year 2030, what should inclusive development will what do you think? Extrapolate from what you've just said. You know, what is it? Where are we going? What do we need to be? What would be a good sign to like look out for in 2030 that says we're doing a good job?
That is a great.
That's question. A big question, isn't it? I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay.
I mean, if it were up to me, I mean, it would be like inclusive development would ensure that a majority of the population, you know, has access to basic infrastructure, water, health, and education, that they're able to withstand shocks for themselves and their family, that they live in security, that they're not afraid, and that they feel that they have a voice in their community and in their society.
I love that. Great. Well, and speaking of the majority of a society. We know that a large population of the world's population is actually youth themselves. And so a huge part of achieving that goal is actually reaching young people in all their manifestations around the world. And so youth and that sustainability that you talked about, Jenny, about, making sure people can be agile in their approaches. And so youth entrepreneurship around the world is critical for us to be doing that. And so Aisha, with your own work, working with young people from literally all corners of the world. My favorite moment was when I was volunteering with CGIU was when I was in Ghana, and I met with a bunch of CGIU students who were all working together just to put together their commitments on social change and how passionate the CGIU program brought them to the work. And I know we have students from dozens, if not over 100 countries, something like that. So tell me a little bit more about your experience working with social entrepreneurs and kind of how that translates to the future of development and why youth should be included in envisioning this idea for maybe a 2030.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone who invited me to be here and speak. And youth entrepreneurship, youth movements, youth culture have always played a really critical role in how the world at large, our communities develop. And sometimes we think about these things as being really sort of silly types of events, but they have major impacts. And when I think of youth movement in ways that everybody sort of knows about, I think about hip hop music that was born out of youth culture and really an opportunity to express themselves and to really talk about the failures of infrastructure and failures of society. And we don't often frame music or art cultures in this way, but it was really what we often find, or why we often find youth there, is because, quite honestly, a lack of money, right? A lack of money and a lack of access, but what they can do is create. It's what we all can kind of do. And so I think one of the more interesting things and exciting things that has happened and was really accelerated by the COVID pandemic was that a lot of people were thinking about, what do I have access to right at this moment? And I have access to my computer and I can create communities. And we saw students asserting themselves, particularly in areas that they were studying, and starting to really see the gaps. I think the current generation of youth leaders, and when I say current generation, I'm thinking like, and it's roughly a 10-year gap of maybe like high school to early grad school. What I started to see is them really questioning the structures and the systems and sitting with these things in really poignant ways and pointing them out into the world, right? And I think this was like the TikTok explosion, where they were really providing these wonderful insights about their personal experiences versus the systems and the structures that they were seeing. And what they were benefiting from was this large audience. And a lot of us began to think about like, oh yeah, it's really interesting that we don't have healthcare systems here, or let's think about why this is, and let's dive deep into these sort of historical aspects of exclusion and what that looks like and how we reframe things. And then organizations started to see that, and not just organizations, corporations started to see that there was something there and started to pay these students, these young people, for their thoughts and their mindsets. And so there was a rise of maybe thought leaders, a rise of entrepreneurs, infopreneurs, creativepreneurs, individuals that were given an opportunity to take the little means that they had, which was maybe a cell phone and some pithy thoughts, and put them together in a way that was accessible to a lot of different people. And I think that because of this, we also see a rise in local action right? Because they're taking their phones with them and showing people, this is what I'm dealing with. This is my community. This is my church group. This is my synagogue. This is my school. And this is where I'm going to make change at the moment. And I really hope that what this translates to in the future as people being active and global minded, acting locally, and really thinking about their emotional intelligence, the critical thought they put into the historical system, and really positioning themselves as being system change leaders. And if we do that, I feel like we'll be in a really great place in about 10 or 15 or 20 years to see some really poignant movements. But I also think it's going to be messy. I think that's one of the horrible things, or not horrible, it's necessary, right? Like the friction is where we get this sort of movement forward, the pushback, but it's about maybe getting everybody else on board to understanding how this is benefiting everyone, and also thinking about maybe helping these individuals who sort of have acquired this information maybe a little bit more organically, helping them build some structure. And this is where our older, more experienced development professionals I think can really help to shape and mold and mentor.
That's amazing. Oh, thank you so much, Aisha. And I love it because yes, there's so many amazing young people out there in the world who have the ideas, have the capabilities. I think, unfortunately, at least in the field of international development, I think young people often get the short end of the stick and are too often overlooked. And, I don't know, real quickly, Aisha, could you speak to just, you've been at the program for 10 years since its beginning, but like, well, you've been working there, you've been volunteering. Come on, you've been there since the beginning.
Right. Exactly. Like Ryan and I have gone through the program. I think we started the same year, 2010, as college students, as idealistic college students wanting to change the world, because that's how you start, right?
Well, and I wanted to see, like, what do you feel like? One of the things what have you noticed trend-wise? Like, isn't it amazing to watch these young people with just such passion and ideas and really that drive to change the world, right?
Right. I think this holistic idea of self in work is really one of the things that I am most excited about. Ryan, you and we came from a group of individuals, and where we're at the tail end of what leadership looks like, is rising, grinding, working all the time. We were praised for this. This was not something that we just pulled out of thin air, especially if you happen to be an individual that is queer or Black or, a person of color, where we already know, particularly in the United States and of course in other places in the world, but I will speak from my US experience, that you have to work 2 to 3 times harder than everyone else to be seen and to be appreciated and to be noticed in these spaces, right? They were exclusionary. So that's what we thought we had to do to be heard. And how many of us, our friends that we know of, especially because the Clinton Global Initiative tends to attract people that can be considered overachievers, right? So how many of us, 26 years old, calling each other up from hospital rooms because we're exhausted? These were very real things, or because we were living off of Red Bull and no sleep. This was really common. Yeah. And I am really enjoying the shift of like, no more, right? Yeah. And part of that is us being like in our late 30s and 40s now saying like, yeah, we can't keep this up. Like we're not going to make it to 50 at this rate. And that's the truth of it. And not wanting to see that happen going forward, but also younger individuals being like, y'all are crazy. Like this is not okay.
I know.
Like, how are you living like this? And so I think that that's one major shift that I've seen in how leadership and sort of how people want to be leaders. And really thinking critically about wellness, and not just doing good works, but also feeling good, and whatever that wellness looks like. Jenny says, what you mentioned something like, what is defining that health and wellness, that dignified life mean for you? That is really center into the shift that I'm seeing from a lot of the students. And part of it too is like their mental health. They've been we've been in a pandemic for 3 years, and it's varying stages depending on where you are. It's, you know, maybe less intense in some places, and other places they still don't have access to medications and education and all of the things that would help us to be able to maybe move through the pandemic and start to live our lives in different ways. And this anxiety was very prevalent in the past 2 years in a way that I've never experienced and I've never seen before. And what that made us do as an organization is like, we have to like chill. We have to redefine what it is to what we think being a global citizen is, how we want people to participate, and what we're leaning on in terms of what our expectations for those students coming into the program are. And this has completely, I think, shifted my thoughts in terms of how I'm going about education and awareness and support for those students in our program.
Wow, thank you. No, yeah. So, there's so much to unpack that we'll both get to. We'll continue this because I think it's so critical. You know, one of the things that's so powerful about as Jenny was kind of saying, you know, we have this whole field of folks that we just need to make sure that everybody gets across the finish line in a way. And how do we do that to be inclusive, especially people, different people from different backgrounds, and how they bring themselves into the world, and particularly young people who themselves are not just passive recipients of aid or programs, but actually are the drivers and leaders and have the energy to do this, particularly in areas like the creative economy, as you were saying, Aisha, people who are artists and all that type of stuff. And what are the ways in which we can do better about reaching them and tapping into those skills and leveraging their own leadership skills? Well, as you said, also thinking about the ways in which we can do cross-generational mentorship and making sure that we're guiding people and adapting and being agile ourselves, not just individually as professionals who have grown in this field, but also as institutions and structurally too. How do we better ourselves and the work so that all people around the world can benefit? But most importantly, centering people who are experiencing the lived realities of their world. And so what's also the pandemic has also brought about is our ever-growing interconnectedness, which is where I'm excited to talk with you, Natalia, about your own passionate work that you've been doing you've dedicated your life to this essentially because you're now a growing expert in this area of distance learning and education. And not only were we able to build our Gender Data 101 course and work on that together, but you and I also recently developed a youth champions training for over 1,000 rising youth leaders in 23 West African countries. And through close partnership with oh my God, Natalia, you can remember all those young people who just said, I got this idea. They were amazing. And they came to the table, volunteered their time, in addition to partnering with regional organizations like the Ouagadougou Partnership and the West Africa Health Organization. Our organization, Health Policy Plus Project, partnered with Tech Change to create an entire platform where these young social entrepreneurs essentially could come together and not just share about their experience, but also talk about what their needs were, particularly when it related to health policies related to sexual reproductive health, human rights, and HIV. And so, Natalia, thinking big picture, of course, you know, why is platforms like that important? How are they connecting people? One of the greatest things about young people these days is that we are more connected than ever. I have friends in every corner of the world that I text, not just once and twice. I don't send a snail mail and it gets to them in a month and I may receive it. It's like every single day. You know, I have this kid I used to mentor. Well, we got along in a village in the Gambia, West Africa, you know, in 2008. And now he texts me every day, you know? So like, Natalia, from your experience and what we see is going to be critical for that future is digital technology and building people's capacity through distance learning approaches and other ways that build not just individuals, but as we saw with that course, entire networks, getting people to talk to each other, not just having the Western expert come in and tell somebody what to do, but to help people really think critically, especially young people, how to help serve each other. So sorry, what are your thoughts on like what is inclusive development and where do we go in 2030, especially as it relates to digital education?
So I want to start off with saying both Jenny and Maisha's responses, wow, that was amazing to hear. And I'm so excited to add to that. I think, once again, it's a big question. But if I were to say what I think inclusive development is, it's already been said in different words by Jenny and Maisha, but it really is that everyone can have the power to shape their communities for the better. It is really like, not only can they shape them, but they also can reap the benefits from that as well. And so quite simply, the biggest challenge is the everyone piece. And I think what I want to really focus on in my response is I think that technology, as you've mentioned, can be so powerful and so connecting. There's like, I think what's really important though, is I was about to say unlimited potential, but it's really important to say that we really need to critically look at technology and demystify it for other folks. I think what's the biggest hurdle for us, like looking forward to 2030, is tech literacy among the development community. And I think this, not only that, it compounds with the idea of colonization in international development community. How do we decolonize the international development community, and how does that relate to technology? Because right now, I think we were talking about, you mentioned earlier, big data is huge. You hear that everywhere. I think, unfortunately, big data can also come with this mentality of extraction from communities and taking their data and deciding what to do with it, because the mentality, like the colonialist mentality, that we know what's best. And so it's really breaking down those items. I think that's a huge barrier that we're going to have to go through. And technology, while it can be so powerful, I think that's also the double-edged sword of it all, is that it can compound those effects. Like you can have that bias etched into the code that you're going to be replicating to thousands of communities. And so I think what I'm excited to talk more is making sure that we take a community first approach in inclusive development and really work together and make sure that we're very critical of technology moving forward. And so, yeah, that's my answer.
That's amazing. So if I summarize, Natalia, you're recognizing the power of a technology and where it could go, and especially as it relates to just the broader field, while also with an inclusive development lens, being mindful of its potential harmful effects, which I guess I then will circle back to this. But I think maybe going back to you, Jenny, then thinking more broadly speaking, what are the barriers to inclusive development that we are facing? We obviously heard from Natalia, and we'll hear a little bit more on technology, but even just as we strive to make this field far more integrated when it comes to inclusive development, in the sense that, one of our respondents from our STAP survey really highlighted, like, why is this even an issue? Are we just perpetuating the same journey to self-reliance or country ownership? I mean, are we just giving a lot more BS just to, satisfy someone in an ivory tower somewhere? Or is this really going to have impact? And I know that, we want to get everyone in inclusive development, but how do we reach people, especially when there are power dynamics, safeguarding issues everywhere, and just a lack of appreciation for the complexities of the work that we're doing and our own positionalities that we bring to the work? So can you speak to maybe some of the barriers you've seen in it or in the broader field?
Opportunity and potential there. And as you said, there still exists this digital divide in countries where almost 90% of the population has access to mobile phone coverage. Still only 50% have mobile phones. And then the question is, who has those mobile phones? And even if they have those mobile phones, are they literate And if they're not literate, how can they engage in that? And so it risks, there are these opportunities, also these kind of there are no silver bullets, right? This is just kind of, and so, you know, we really can't put our hands or put all of our kind of hats into one basket, because we know that kind of every single context requires different approaches, because every society is different and the power dynamics are different. And so there is a risk with technology in and of itself to put way too much kind of confidence in it without kind of really understanding kind of the existing structures that really exist. So from a technology perspective, I would say there's some barriers, there's some opportunities and barriers. From a kind of a broader perspective, in terms of kind of some of the barriers that I've seen, is that you've talked about this a little bit in some of your work, but you know, some of the traditional aid structures and the way that we view the role of public-private partnerships, I still see that there's this siloing in terms of the way that aid is provided and the way kind of we ask for aid and the way it engages with the private sector and engages with communities. And I think that that's a real barrier. How do you kind of change systems that don't just exist in the United States, but they exist in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia and Europe and elsewhere? And that's kind of a real concern. And then the second thing that I've seen, which is a barrier, and you all have talked about this, is that some of our own skills and some of our own biases, when we start off, maybe as we are all younger and we grow, sometimes we're a little bit more open, sometimes we're not. But the thing that I've seen in myself and in others is that, you know, reaching inclusive development doesn't necessarily just require kind of what we can call these technical skills, but it also requires people skills, like something simple like humility, that recognizing that you might have a skill or a technique or an expertise in one area, and that doesn't make you the expert, right? Because everyone brings something to the table. You know, this idea of being able to listen to people and really listen to them and have these difficult conversations, that's something that's really hard to do. And to really honestly constantly question yourself and your work and what you're doing and who it's for and what it's about, and have people around you who are kind of, you know, telling you when they think that you might be doing something wrong. And I see those three things are as being very important, because it can be, as we move on in our careers, it can be easy to fall into an echo chamber where you keep on doing the same thing and you think you're doing good and you're really not, because other people are telling you that you're doing good. And as one thing that I will end here, there was this documentary that came out about 2 or 3 years ago called Unprotected, which was about the More Than Me Academy in Liberia, which I think for any young development professional, you should really see it, because it's very eye-opening and extremely upsetting in terms of kind of how going into a particular context without really understanding all of the power dynamics in play can go horribly wrong. So I would just, I'll stop here.
Can you say the name of that movie again? I would love to, just in case I missed it. What was the name of that again?
It's called Unprotected. It's by
Unprotected.
I'll put it in the put it in.
I can't wait to watch that. Not that I'm wow. Well, thank you very much. Well, and I think one of the things that we're also kind of push, like the field is advancing, we're recognizing we need to grow and advance our work and reach people in all different ways. I love the messaging around challenging our own mindsets as practitioners and not coming in with this whole idea of we're gonna change the world and we know it, we know best. You know, I always think of the young man featured in the movie, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, this young Malawian kid who was just basically cut to the curb and, passed off as never going to be anything. He wasn't even he was allowed to sneak into the school library because he didn't have school fees. And yet when a major drought faced his village, he literally went to the library and saw a picture of a windmill. That's it. And just tried, and then ended up creating an irrigation system that saved his whole village, and I think about, that's just one example of the billions of people out there in the world that, have ingenuity, are creative, and yet we come in as practitioners thinking, okay, we know it all. And so actually I'm gonna go back to Natalia, because in addition to technology, you also do a lot of work in capacity development. And that's almost the transfer of capabilities, skills, but also building networks as well. And I think as we're thinking about localization, decolonizing aid, and those types of things, it's really critical that we're not coming at it as daddy knows best, or but also recognizing and leveraging the skills and knowledge of our local colleagues as well, because we've seen in the pandemic, more than anything, they're our hero. They have always been our heroes, but they need to be centered as the heroes and the people that lead. And so kind of building on the barriers, how have you, in experience of capacity development education, what are the ways in which we need to be doing that right so that we do reach the right people in the right way, especially people from wherever they may be coming from?
Well, I have two parts to this. I want to acknowledge, Jenny mentioned about making sure that you leverage your team and the skills that you have. I think a very important mentality to have when you are capacity building is that someone, most likely locally, has had the idea that you've had and has actually started building it out with a team themselves. And I think it's very important to tackle, especially in the US, our mentality of individualism versus the collective right off the bat. And it's very, when I say community first approach, it's really partnering and, as you said, centering the appropriate people that should be leading the initiative. I think, of course, you and as up and coming inclusive development professionals have key skills that you can provide these teams. But it's so important to, when we talk about capacity building, we're really talking about space and making space and maybe questioning why that we need to make this space. Has this been created? Has this been taken away from someone else? And I think the second part to my answer that I think will be so important is really that analysis of power dynamics and like where power is currently held. And I think, you know, it's always been, I think, a theme of development work, but even now, I think we're seeing a lot more of a reckoning of the historical nature of the development community. And I think examining power and challenging power will be very important in capacity building.
Thank you so much. Definitely. And so kind of moving on to our next question, I think we'll have maybe 2 or 3 more in the maybe 15 minutes we have left. Aisha, kind of moving to not just your passion for young people, but your passion for accessibility. I think if you could in part answer like the barrier question, but also think about how do we create more accessible spaces when we're building knowledge or having exchange, working with networks, working with young people, working with cultural and cultural complexities around the world. Like, what are the barriers to that, and why is accessibility so important as we move forward when we think about building out our world and our capabilities, not just individually but structurally?
Well, for me, the first barrier that I see most often is access to utilities, basic utilities. So this is electricity and internet, and even defining what access is. It's very different depending on where you are in the world. So, I mean, for me living in New York, I may not, let's say I don't have internet in my apartment building. Access is going to the local coffee shop, which is 2 blocks away, versus some students that we have in our program that for them, access is, I have access about twice a month and I travel a great distance to get that access. And when we said in our program and you know our information, we say, hey, you do need access to the internet in order to participate in the program. They're like, sure, I have access 2 or 3 times a month. It's not great access, you know, and it does inhibit our ability. I shouldn't say it inhibits anything. It really doesn't. It makes us have to think about ways that we can rethink how we're putting information out there, how we're sharing and how we're teaching. And so a few things that I try and use is, we talk about big data, but there's also like these massive organizations that they just do it really, really well, where they have, you know, these platforms and they do it well for a reason, right? But they have these platforms where we can invite students to access the content that they have and download it all onto a mobile device. I think about the individual, and also when we think about access, I think about what it looks like to provide or try and connect with people when you're underfunded. This to me can be, I mean, it's a lot more difficult if you're working with an individual with disabilities, such as they might be deaf or they might be blind, whether or not they have access to the tools to be able to even get what it is that I would like them to have, the content that I would like them to have, and then us again thinking about what does this look like. And so those barriers are pretty pervasive. And we often think about them, and when I say we, I mean like the community that I work with often think about them as being like overseas problems or overseas issues, but we see the same issues in rural America. And this issue of access affects their ability to not just be a part of a program like ours, but how they're able to interact, and they're developing relationships with individuals that have very different experiences. And culturally, they are sometimes overwhelmed. Socially, they're overwhelmed. And what does this present to them? For some, the feelings of maybe like, oh, I'm a failure, I don't belong here because I didn't necessarily have these things, or I don't necessarily have these things, really, that's hard to get over. It's hard to quantify, it's hard to build for, right? Because you never quite know how people are going to react, how people are going to develop. And so trying to meet people where they are when you have such a broad cohort of individuals can be really tough. And so when I think about access, I learn new ways to think about it every year based on the needs of who it is that we're meeting. And so the first year we introduced the curriculum, access was, oh, as long as they have the internet. And if they're in school, of course they have the internet, we're good. Wasn't the deal, right? So now I have to look for downloadable options. The same with the accessibility piece, like, oh, as long as they're in school, they'll be able to find interpreters and deaf interpreters, and that's not the case. You know, so relearning like, okay, you guys, we need a budget for this, and having to fight for the budget, right? And, you know, also thinking about us being a smaller team, I think one of the things that I'd really love to explore are bots in WhatsApp, because as Jenny mentioned, this mobile access. And so I would love to be able to have an opportunity to build out some components of the curriculum that can be accessed through tools like WhatsApp. But there's only me, right? There's only me on my team that's sort of building this out, and the idea, like just trying to get support for, you know, for how to address some of these issues with access. That's already a huge issue for anybody working in the professional and international development space. But a lot of these issues have been, I don't want to say solved, they have workarounds where those individuals are from and how they are meeting together to maybe pull information from the radio, depending on where they are. And I'm learning a lot from those individuals, those students who are doing it. And so trying to find ways to bring them into the conversation to make sure, not just that their voice is heard, but I'm actually, like, we're learning from you. This is your idea, and making sure that they feel invested in the process as well. There's so much that hasn't been explored, but you know, the barriers they're deep.
Yeah, well, and I'd say to your other passion too, the notion of accessibility includes even our ideologies, our philosophies, our paradigms and approaches themselves. If we're speaking in science speak up here that only 5 people in the world actually understand, you know, versus really being able to make sure the ways in which we communicate, how we communicate, and in what languages and coded languages as well, the more we can bring people together. Yeah, I agree. Well, and, you know, I think in order, so then moving really to the hard skills that professionals need in this field, especially thinking of the diversity of individuals that are within this field. We're all not carbon copies of one another. Moving back to you, Jenny, and building on kind of Aisha's points, what are you previously mentioned, needing to be more empathic, needing to be more listening. Are there other things that we need to be changing as individuals, particularly within the frame of inclusive development, that we can work on to get that? What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned already those people skills, and then beyond those people skills, I think we've talked about them a little bit before, but we've talked about data science and what does that really mean? I mean, I think one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to take some type of class that's in quantitative data, whether that's statistics or econometrics, so that when you're looking at facts and figures, whether it's in a report or it's in a article or whatever, that you can be a good consumer of research and data and ask questions, right? And then linking that, if you want to do is go a step farther, where you could actually kind of lead kind of evidence-based research, then that would require kind of some other types of quantitative skills. But I think that would be the first one. And then combining that also with an understanding of kind of qualitative research methods, right? How do you talk to people? What are anthropological approaches, sociological approaches? Those two things fit together, and they don't necessarily fit together in a very easy way, and they're very, very important, right? And so I think that those are the two major skills. We've also talked about kind of GIS. I think that that's something that's interesting, that just being able to visually map different systems and structures and see spatial relationships between markets and roads and health centers and schools can be quite powerful. Getting back to Natalia's point, it could also be potentially kind of misused. So we have to be a little bit careful with that and understand how it can be misused. And I guess the final one I would say is something in the finance world, right? I mean, so what that could be an accounting class, that could be kind of a business class. I talk to my husband all the time, and he works for a private company, and he laughs because I'm always like, the private sector. And he said, but I'm non-governmental. Why don't I count? He said, I'm non-governmental for profit. And you always talk about non-governmentals and you assume that they're nonprofits. And I was like, that's really a fair point, right? But this way of saying that, if we're thinking about inclusive development, it's all of these sectors together, all these different stakeholders. And an important part of that is the private sector. And so we need to understand each other and speak the same language. And so that might not mean that you go and work for kind of a small company for 5 years, but at least understand kind of the culture and where it's coming from. So those would be my 4 things that I do.
So critical though. Oh my gosh. And like understanding cross-cultural, cross-sectoral, being culturally competent, and like breaking out of false binaries, right? Like it's either us or them, private sector or not, So building on that.
Ryan, can I just jump in really quick?
Yes,
I believe Professor Aker, I just want to ask you and be mindful of your time. I know that you have some other things to attend to, so I just wanted to bring that up.
You're good. We'll give it just a few more minutes to wrap up, Jenny, if that's okay. And if you need to leave, I totally understand. But like, I wanted to also move from the structural, the technical skill, to also, Natalia, your own skill set and passion around GESI work as well, and understanding not only the cultural competencies, but the diversities and intersectionalities and layered realities of people. Can you speak a little bit more to building that kind of skill set as well?
Yes, of course. I think before I go into that, I do want to say I have been very critical of technology during this whole time, but I do think we can learn a lot from the tech industry, specifically in terms of agile project management. People always say that the international development community needs to be adaptable, it needs to be flexible. Well, what's a way you can do that? You can take notes from the tech industry and learn a bit about agile project management and how do you evolve projects as they're going. I think that's a very critical tool that we have to use or adapt to move forward. In terms of gender, I think
big hole.
it's such a huge topic, and definitely can't say enough in like 30 seconds. But I think just understanding, embracing, as Jenny mentioned, there's no one size fit all solution to anything. And I think the reason why that relates to gender is that it's such a good example of how we need to embrace pluralism and multiplicity in our work. And the best way to kind of introduce yourself to that concept, honestly, is gender, and being able to explore how that fits into your own life and how that fits into your work. And so definitely a course, specifically, I mean, Gender Data 101 is a great course by Tech Change, but also just being able to read up and understand just the multiplicity of our world is a key skill moving forward.
Thank you. And then my another really hard question, but moving finally to Aisha to kind of close us out, like as we think of ourselves in a sector, you know, how do we also build on our, you know, on what we need to be accomplished as individuals, but also recognizing that some of us have resiliency within us as well, because we may come from backgrounds where our personal identities or personal characteristics may put us at a disadvantage for one reason or another. So how can we be resilient or overcome some of those types of barriers that are either even in our workplaces that prevent us from advancing or having our ideas rise to the impact that they could? If you might speak to that, given the diverse range of young people from around the world you've worked with, and if your own personal experience, like anything you want to close us out with in regards to that.
I hope people aren't afraid to be versatile and to really think creatively about how they are participating in these different programs, sectors, job opportunities. There can sometimes be an idea that we have to do something a very specific way. And we're still taught this way in college and university. And it works for the people that it was intended to work for. And I often think about, I get these types of questions all the time, and sometimes they're coming in a place where people are sort of rooted in this idea of imposter syndrome. And I sort of sit with my students now, and it took me, like, I don't know, I started asking this question of myself as well, about how we think about ourselves. So this might be gaining our understanding of like reflexivity, or being able to have a reflexive moment with ourselves, and ask the question, are we really not qualified to be in the room or in the space? Or is it that we are currently in a space that has historically excluded us, and now we are being invited to the table because everybody is looking, but we are expected to be our most authentic, our bravest, our most brilliant selves with the same people who were perfectly fine with our exclusion. And so I hope that, you know, as young people, they're not just learning to recognize that, but asking those questions, thinking about the spaces that they're in, understanding that they don't always have to be all things to all people, and also understanding it is okay to do lots of different things, to be in lots of different places, to learn from lots of different places, and hopefully through the accumulation of varying experiences and their own individual passions, that they will step up and lead. And create the organizations and the systems and the structures that will benefit the future of the world, but also would have benefited little them.
Yeah, Aisha, thank you so much. I agree. And guess what? That is, you know, we are all needed, and all of our diversity, you know, and that's actually going to help us get to all the things we talked about today. Our layered realities, our truths, when we let them emerge, actually are the solutions that we are the ones we've been waiting for, all of us, you know? So, okay, well, fabulous conversation. I know we could have gone for an hour on each one of these questions, so thank you for getting through that. And to summarize, you know, at the end of the day, inclusive development is essential to every development output and input and outcome that we're working for. Without it, we're not going to achieve our broader goals. And therefore, as practitioners, it's imperative that we understand the intricacies of inclusive development and how it fits into every sector of development, but also how our full selves actually bring opportunity to this field if we allow ourselves to not just see ourselves, but to work together with everyone, everywhere, in every way. How about that? If I can summarize. Okay, with that said, I'm gonna want to first thank our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause, everyone in the chat is woo. And I want to then now close out and pass it to my co-chair, Kaylin, where we're going to just break out into small groups. The panelists, you're welcome to stay, but I understand if you need to go. But we'll just offer maybe 20 minutes to debrief what we all heard and get your own insights. So Kaylin, are you there? And anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you, everyone. What a spectacular panel. I learned so much. And I think we actually have the benefit of being not a super large group. So I would propose that we stay as one rather than doing breakout groups, depending on how many of us stay on the line. That might be a little bit easier for discussion. Does that work for you, Ryan?
Yeah, yes, it does. It does, okay. Sure.
Great.
You want to facilitate that discussion then?
Sure. So I think, what we wanted to do, and actually before I jump into that discussion, for those of you who might want to leave, I'm just going to pop our contact information here into the chat so that you can stay in touch with us. If you'd like to, I have each of our emails as co-chairs, as well as the emails of each of our speakers. So thank you all very much. And so we now invite those of you who'd like to participate in our debrief conversation. You're welcome to bring yourself on with your camera or use your voice in addition to the chat. But we really just wanted to use this time to talk about what resonated with you and what you'll be focusing on in your work. What skills are you hoping to build to address what we just talked about? And I would invite anyone to jump in.
I think we've been talking about it a little bit here at FHI 360. And I don't know if you can consider this sort of a skill or sort of implementing, new technology in what you do. But I was sort of thinking as our panelists were talking about some of the language that we use. I mean, of course, here at FHI 360, we interact with our local teams on a daily basis. And thinking about things like how you address people from sort of a gender perspective. I know, I believe, Natalia, you mentioned it a little bit in terms of sort of being gender conscious about what you say, who you interact with, how you interact with them. I think here, often, even when you're doing things like sending an email, or if you're talking to someone on the phone, despite sometimes having the best intentions, this is quote unquote Pride Month. I think it's really important to be careful about how you sort of convey things like pride to people in other countries that may not view or depict pride the same way as we do here. So I know a lot of organizations have that message of, having sort of like a blanket outreach and speaking in terms like that. But I think it's also important to sort of pay attention to how people sort of receive and talk about things like pride. And of course, this is important because if people feel alienated, especially when you're speaking about people from like other countries, if they feel alienated, then they're not going to speak up, right? Then it's going to be hard for them to want to come to the table. Then the entire point of what we mean by sort of inclusivity in terms of, getting to a place where people feel like they have a voice, it's sort of moot if you're not paying attention to little things like that. So I just wanted to appreciate that message.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. I think that's always one of the challenging things about diversity, equity, and inclusion work from a global perspective, is there is so much to consider. And even what the concept of diversity means will vary by the community that you're in. So how does a company or organization working in international development approach a diversity, equity, and inclusion program from a global perspective? And I think asking those questions is so critical because, as you said, if you take a US-centric or Western-centric approach to your DEI program, you could be excluding, or like you said, alienating people around the world who might view things differently. I remember Ryan and I even had conversations this was a long time ago, Ryan, so I don't know if it's like fresh in your mind, but how even like terminology like LGBTI plus, right, doesn't apply everywhere. Like people who identify as part of the community may not say, oh, I identify as part of the LGBT community, because that within like the language that they use may not resonate. So there is a lot. And I definitely view that as part of the future of international development and what we need to address as young professionals, for sure.
Yeah,
Ryan,
well,
do you have something?
yeah, just as an out gay man here in the United States that does LGBT work or gender and sexual diversity work around the world, I think positionality is a really powerful thing, because we as practitioners need to know how we bring ourselves into the work as well. I'm Joseph, I really appreciate the point of not wanting to alienate people, but really welcome people to conversations and make sure we're aware of how we bring ourselves into the world. You know, even doing queer rights around the world, it's as to Natalia's point earlier, it's like we also don't want to risk outing people if they, you know, or causing conversations that then put people at risk. When, you know, I can come into office and be my fabulous self as a white Western person, but then I leave and then I was that gay guy that was in the office. And sorry, I don't want to center around just LGBT, because I know the experiencing of being a woman and traveling around the world, or being of a different religious background, like, and going to different cultures around the world. There's just different ways in which people have to think about how they position themselves as practitioners, right? As people, there's so many different ways in which we just have to be mindful of what we do, and not just who we are, but even organizationally. I think Joseph is kind of where you're going as well, like how we, and that will create, and to the bigger point, will create the welcoming space to be able to get to where we want to go to.
Cheesy, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much for the panelists for the conversation. I thought it was amazing. I'm looking forward to connecting with you all. My question is about a bit about travel and like geography. So as the pandemic, started, most firms who traveled regularly stopped traveling. And I think as we think about currently the kind of political climate, the impact on fuel prices, and all these things that change or interfere with the way travel happens, what the role and importance of getting actual lived experience in various countries you work in, and the impact on like your ability to work in that space. Is it critical that we as young professionals find ways, either through our work or externally, to still, go to countries we're working in, or is there truly a way to kind of work in the space from, your office in DC or your office in California, or wherever you reside? So I think my question more is around how do we deal with the change dynamics of travel, generally speaking, and travel in our sector, and our ability to be like credible and knowledgeable about the people and communities we're working with that aren't, our native, our home communities. And sorry, question wasn't for anyone in particular. Maybe I'd start with Jenny, since you're just joining us from Niger, but
I think
open to any panelists as well.
I think Jenny might have signed off.
I'm here.
Okay.
I just missed the last part of that question. I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating it?
Still here.
Sure. It was just more around how we think about the role of travel and being local in our work with the backdrop of the pandemic, and how that halted travel with global political, geopolitical issues, and the impact on fuel prices, and just the need to, how do we kind of square being in DC or being wherever you may be in the Western world, and the need and importance of having local experience in the countries and communities that you're working with?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And it's not just even with the pandemic. I think we felt it more acutely with the pandemic. I've seen this even more in Niger, also with security issues in certain areas, where with attacks in kind of the far west and also in the far east, people have been either displaced, or other individuals don't come to those areas anymore. And you can see that many of these areas in the west of the country become more and more isolated over time. And then fewer projects go there and governments don't go there. And so, I think we really grappled with during the pandemic, how do you maintain that connection? And and kind of, ensure that you're hearing these different voices. And one of the ways that we did it gets back to Natalia's point, is that this is a case where I think technology, not Zoom, but technology just of like simple WhatsApp groups can be very powerful, right? So it's not exactly the same, but, and that doesn't necessarily allow us to hear from individuals who may not have smartphones or may not necessarily be able to how to use those smartphones, but kind of finding other ways to communicate is crucial. And then once we were able to kind of get back to the field and start traveling again, that's a case where technology is not going to be a perfect substitute. So I think technology gets us far enough, but not necessarily as a perfect substitute for that. But what we have seen is that kind of the power of simple WhatsApp messages and sharing experiences and photos and things like that can be quite powerful, at least for a certain period of time, but it's never going to completely kind of substitute for that in-person experience. Great question.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been thinking about that question a lot too, as we see more of operationalizing of what localization means. Like if we truly are going to make actual changes in how we work, will that mean less of those short-term assignments? And then what does that mean for perhaps professionals who got that experience internationally through those short-term assignments? And I think, like Jenny said, there is a lot that's gained, whether it's connection or better understanding of how our work happens practically. So I've been thinking about that myself. And to me, it feels almost like there's a combination. There's probably going to be some changes, right? There are some types of trips that I think definitely didn't need to be international trips that I think about. I had a trip before the pandemic where all of us gathered to discuss methodology for a gender equality and social inclusion strategy for a for a project. We were doing research basically, and we all gathered to discuss our research methodology in person. But really that could have been a Zoom call, that part of it. And the actual enumerator work, the people who were doing the interviews, that makes more sense in person. So I think like maybe thinking a little bit more critically about some of our travel makes sense. And then there are other opportunities where I think young professionals can really provide support to projects so that long-term staff can focus on the technical work of their project, like things like doing a file audit or a grants audit that aren't very glamorous, but you learn a lot. As a young professional, I did that and it really helped me. So I'm hoping there'll be some combination in the future. And then just being more conscious of travel in general from a climate perspective makes a lot of sense. I even think about that in my personal life when I take trips. Yeah, Ryan.
Well, building on this, I also wanted to not migrate or go to, like, as young professionals, as we're thinking about how we evolve, or just professionals evolve, professionals evolve, the fact that we all also need to be able to be agile in our work as well, and being able to do a wide range of things. In addition to just being able to experience in-country work, we also have to be able to be knowledgeable about so many things, right? And so what does that look like to you all from your perspectives? How do we do that? What should it be? I don't know. I'd love to hear from you. No answer, just a question.
I'm sorry, I thought that was the hands up, raising my hand emoji. I am one of those who Ryan described as young at heart, as Caitlin knows. I'm not a youth. But I talk about this constantly with younger folks. There's such a higher bar and expectation of knowledge. Like, I remember going into job interviews when I finished college, and people would simply tell me what their company did because I didn't know and I was not expected to know. Young professionals are expected to know so much now. And I think it's like a combination of like being and I would say like the older professionals who truly thrive and not simply like, have a job that they have. They are like constant students of the industry and whatever's we're doing. And I think like having some tricks to be knowledgeable about whatever topic it is you're talking about, And I think the biggest one is not over talking. I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make. Like, I try every meeting I go into to have one thing to say that people are like, oh, that's, and I mute myself and be quiet. And I think like, but the level of expectations on young professionals right now to have knowledge is, it create like insanely intimidating for me. If I had to have done that, I don't know how I would have done. Not well though, I think.
Well, and as one of our former panelists says, even the idea of knowledge valuation as well. What is knowledgeable? And if we're really thinking about the future of this work, is it really about knowing everything, or is it creating safe spaces together where we learn from each other? And most importantly, where we center like local communities and people who have probably the best knowledge, right? I don't know, like, oh, there's a lot.
Yeah, I really like that, Ted, about going into meetings preparing to listen in addition to talk. I think that's like a great tip in general for creating inclusion and inclusive spaces, like Ryan said. And I do think this idea of knowledge valuation is so important, where it's like, if we expect young professionals to know how the development industry used to work, right? Like how you put a proposal together right now, right? As opposed to the future, where we're trying to learn from the people coming into our companies and what they bring to our companies, as opposed to, oh, they know how to speak the language our company currently speaks, or the lingo USAID currently uses. I think like having those chances to learn is definitely important. And if we create that space, hopefully we learn from young professionals too. Because I know I've learned a lot from my colleagues who've joined the company after us. Any last questions or thoughts with our remaining few minutes? Anyone who hasn't chimed in wants to, you're welcome.
Say, like, I agree completely. I learned way more from like you and other younger folks when I was at Chemonics than I did my peers and seniors. I'd also say, like, on that like learning point, like I think a huge, probably after like paid leave, the biggest underutilized benefit is that professional development funds that everyone gets and never uses. And I'd really encourage people to think about trying to get your supervisors to allow you to hire an outside mentor with those funds. There's a lot of people in like the consulting world that would happily take on an assignment like that.
That is great advice. I used my professional development funds last year for professional coaching, and it was a game changer. And I know not every company has this, but when your company does have a benefit where they sponsor training or conferences, finding the time to take advantage of that is really challenging, but definitely rewarding. I'll admit, in my years at Chemonics, I have not utilized that benefit every year because it's challenging to make the time. But yeah, well, thank you. I see some thank yous coming in from Gary and Jenny, and I want to thank all of our speakers again and my fellow co-chairs. Ryan, is there anything you want to add to wrap up as our moderator?
I just want to say, this is really about building community. And as we've learned today, we're learning from each other. We all have different things to offer and value. And even though another thing for young people, especially, is like, you may think you don't know enough, but you actually know so much. And so don't be afraid to lean into that. We have a wonderful LinkedIn group where hopefully all you will join, and just sharing resources, building connections with each other and with all the people our work serves. That's where the future lies. And so it's not only about our individual capabilities, but our collective community capabilities. I've so enjoyed meeting Cheesy and Joseph. We were at the SID conference, and making friends and people that you love, truly care, truly with authenticity and genuine care and concern. It really matters to this field, and it will help drive it. So just thank you for being here, but also never forget that this is just one of many conversations that I hope we can continue, because we certainly didn't explore everything today. So thank you for being here, everyone.
everyone.
All right. Bye.